All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our Google Forms workshop. Today we are going to be focusing on quizzes, creating different types of quizzes. My name is Jamie Trujillo, and I am your presenter, and I have the wonderful Mariah Guillen with me, who is my moderator. So Mariah will be moderating the chat. If you all have any questions throughout the workshop, I will be sharing my screen. But please feel free to open up a tab of your own and just follow along with what I'm saying. If you like, or if you have, of course, double monitors, you can work while looking at my shared screen. But I really do want this to be a working workshop. So please do open up a new tab, follow along with what I'm telling you so that you can create and practice with making quizzes using Google Forms. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. All right. So right now, I actually shouldn't be opening up an Edge browser. I should be opening up another Chrome window. So let me open up a Chrome window. There we go. Now we have a Chrome window open. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm in my Delta account here. And we're going to go to Google Forms. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can open up your Google Forms, just as a refresher. You can either go through your Apps menu. Here on the right, there's your Apps menu. It kind of looks like a Rubik's Cube. And you can go into Drive. You can also go straight into Forms. So if you have a folder where you want your form saved, you can go into Drive and you can save it, or you can go into Forms. Either way, it will be saved in your Google Drive. It just won't be saved in a subfolder. You can also just go to forms.google.com. Google has a wonderful naming convention for its URLs. You just put in the app you want, .google.com, and it will take you there. And I am going to, again, switch to my NM Delta account here for my Google Forms. Okay, so now that we have Google Forms opened up, you can start a blank quiz right away, or you can just start from scratch with a blank form. Either way, you can make a quiz. So don't worry about starting it off without being a quiz and then worried that it won't become a quiz later. You can start just with the blank form. We're going to start with a blank quiz. So I'm just clicking on that. And right away, you're going to notice something a little bit different than the last time that we were on this workshop. You'll notice that it started with a default question here. It's a blank question, but it gives you the answer key option. And that is the biggest difference between creating a form that is not a quiz and creating a form that is a quiz. You have an answer key. And of course, quizzes are very useful when you are submitting or assigning work to your students, whether it's through Google Classroom or just through email. It gives you the opportunity to have something automatically graded. And when you have something that is multiple choice, that is really easy. And so that's how we're going to start. We're going to start with some multiple choice questions so that you can see how to create your questions and then create your answer key. So first, we want to title our form. So we want to say, okay, practice test maybe. And if you click up here on the top left, once you have named this, it should, oh, it didn't switch. Usually it does switch, but we're going to name it up here too. Okay, so now I have my first question, and it is defaulted to multiple choice, and that's usually what happens with Google Forms. So I do want this to be my multiple choice question. So I can say, what, I have to delete that, what month has only 20, or let's see, we should say what month has, I'm just going to say only 28 days. We know that there's leap year, but just for purposes of this question. Okay, so I have this. I want to create my options. So I'm going to say January. And then once you do that, you'll notice that Google tries to be very predictive. So you can just, if you wanted to put all 12 months on there, you could, and you can just hit add all and it will add all of those months, or you can pick and choose. So maybe I want to say August, I want to say December, I want to say February, I want to say October. So there's my options. Now what you want to do, and you want to make sure you do this, is you click answer key. Once you do that, it is going to give you the option to choose the correct answer. There you go. There's your correct answer. You can also assign point values. So if you want students to have a grade, and this is of course not required, but if you want students to have a grade and say there's 10 questions, you can assign 10 points per question, or you can give each one 1 point. It's totally up to you how you want to value each question. So say I want to give this 5 points, and then I hit done. Once I've done that, once I have created my answer key, your correct answer will show up there. And that's a great way to double check your answer key just to make sure you didn't accidentally choose the wrong one. Human error is a real thing, so you just want to make sure, and it will show up there. And at the bottom, it will show your point values. And just like any other forms question, you can make it required. So this is multiple choice. Now, one thing that we used to do in the Albuquerque Adult Learning Centers program is we would make answer keys, for example, for practice tests. And those would be just A, B, C, D, E. And those are really easy to create. So I'm actually going to delete this question only because this is my practice form. So I'm going to delete this question here. And I'm going to hit this plus sign and I'm going to create another question. So say I am creating an answer key for a practice test. It doesn't matter what test it is, but it's an answer key for that test. So I can say this is the reading practice test. Okay, so I'm going to change my title up here. This is my reading practice test. And it has 25 questions, but they have the test itself. You don't necessarily have to rewrite every question. You can just say question 1, and it will correspond to the question on their packet, for example. And then you can put and see it's predictive of, again, which is great. So I can just do that, or I could have hit add all, and maybe there's an E, so I want to add that. Okay, now I want to, of course, make sure that my answer is right. Usually these practice tests have their own answer keys, so you want to follow along with that answer key. And so I click answer key, and question number 1 is D. So there we go. And I want to just assign everything 1 point because I want to know how many they got right. So I'm just going to assign it as 1 point. That way for everyone they get right, it's 1 point. So I hit done, and there we go. I can see my answer, and it's worth 1 point, and I want to require it. I don't want to give my students the option to skip it. Maybe you do want to give your students the option to skip it, and so you don't have to make it required. That's just something that I tend to do. It is not something you have to do. So I want to make that required. Now, there are 25 questions, for example, on this practice test. Great. What makes Google Forms so easy is that you can duplicate a question. So right here on the bottom, just right of center, you have a duplicate option. So if I hit duplicate, there we go. It duplicated my question. Now I can just turn this to question 2. I go to my answer key. The answer is not D. In this case, it's B. Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to is when I clicked on B initially, it allowed me to click both. The reason for this is because Google Forms will allow you to give multiple choice options. So maybe if the person answers B, they're right, and maybe if they answer D, they're right. It could be either one. Now in this case, there's only one right answer, so I have to click on the D again to make sure it's unchecked, and then I hit done. And now I can see for question 2, my answer is B. And there we go. If I were to go back to question 1, if I were to click up here, I could see my answer is still D. So you can go back afterward and check it. And so what I would do then is I would just keep duplicating these questions. That way I have the same answer options, and I would just update my answer key. And I would go all the way to 25. And then once a student completes this and submits it, it will tell me how many points they earned. aka how many they got right. So this is a really easy way to make sure that I can get my students' answers and they are graded right away. And, if you're teaching remotely, this is really useful. It's very effective. So multiple choice questions are just really straightforward. You have your answer. It's A, B, C, D, or E. If you had a checkbox option, so maybe I wanted to change this to checkboxes, you could choose multiples. So I could go back to my answer key and I can say, everything is right except E, and I can choose multiples. So I can do that with checkboxes. And I would not choose multiple answers if I had it as a multiple choice question. I would make sure that it was a checkbox question. So again, those are really straightforward. Okay, so please, if you have any questions about those types of questions and answers, please feel free to put them in the chat. Mariah, please feel free to interrupt me if there are any questions. Because I am going to go on to other types of questions. I want to give you guys time to build a form and to try this out. So I want to make sure that I cover the other types of questions. Were there any questions so far in the chat, Mariah?
Nope, no questions.
Okay, great. So let's go on to, I'm just going to keep these questions here. So I have a checkbox question. I have a multiple choice question. I'm going to, when you add a question, if you kind of go back and forth with your questions, make sure you click on the last one, because if I were still on question 1 and I hit add, it would give me a question in between. So if you want to just keep going linearly, make sure you click on the last one and then hit add question. Now with this one, I might say, write in your answer here, and they will know what that is, or I might just ask the question. I could ask that. I could say, where can I find snow this time of year? And maybe it's an open-ended question. Now I can have it as multiple choice, but I can also have a short answer or a paragraph. I can do a drop-down option if I like, but I'm going to look at the short answer. So with this one, and I've seen this in the past where I've created quizzes for a packet that had write-in answers for math, for example, and people had to write in their own answers. When I do my answer key, I'm going to add a correct answer. So I can say New York. I can add another one, Wisconsin, North Dakota. I can add all the options that I think would be correct. With math, it's a lot easier because usually it's just a number. But if I have, different answer options, I can do that. Now, for short answer questions and for paragraph answer questions, you have this option, mark all other answers incorrect. You can leave that unchecked so that they can get feedback, because you can add answer feedback here, or you can check that off. If you wanted to make sure that they gave you one of these answers, you can mark that. Just please be aware that Google Forms is very sensitive. So if they don't capitalize the way that you do, or if they have a space where you don't have a space, it will mark it wrong because it is case sensitive, and it will just make sure that it has to match exactly. So I will give you an example of that. I had a math question where the answer was, for example, 1,750. So I would put 1750 as an answer option. I would also put 1,750, 1,750. I would make sure to do both. That way, if they put the comma or they didn't put the comma, it would still be correct. Google is not a person. It doesn't have the ability to distinguish between the two and know that they are the same. So you want to make sure that you catch those options. It's still possible that they will put something in that is not an exact match. You can always go in and change their feedback. You can always mark it as correct afterward. So you can, again, check or uncheck, mark all other answers incorrect, and you can add answer feedback, which I find to be very useful. So if I click Add Answer Feedback, I can give them an explanation of the answer, okay? So going back to the original question, snow can be found this time of year anywhere north of dot dot dot. I can give them a full explanation so that if they do get it wrong, they can see what happened there. Or I can put the correct answer. So if it's a right-in answer, I can say, okay, the correct answer is 1,750, and I'll put that comma there. It might cause them to contact you and say, this is what I put as my answer. I'm not sure why it was wrong. And that's a great tool because then you can go in and say, you know what, you are right. So, Google form quizzes are not foolproof at all. They're not foolproof because it is a system and it has an algorithm, but you can try to minimize the amount of errors by making sure that you put in every possible option. And when you have like say 1750.5, that can get a little tricky because then you would have to put it with the comma. I would also put in 1750 and a half. I would put it like that. I would put all the other options again. So that can get a little time consuming when you're creating quizzes. But the great thing is that once you've created it one time, you won't have to do it again. And once students give you their feedback, you might catch something where you missed an option or you had a typo yourself, because that can happen. So that is my biggest thing there with the short answer, is just make sure that if it's a right-in answer that you create all the possible ways of expressing that answer. I wouldn't necessarily use a quiz for, say, an essay answer. I wouldn't I wouldn't try to make that into a quiz because there are so many variables in that. So I would just create a paragraph question and then have them write it in and then manually grade that. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend quizzes for that, for longer writing pieces. It would be something that would be like a fill in the blank, something very short. Sorry for my dog's barking. So just to give you guys another example, we want to do a drop down option. So we can do that same type of question. Christmas is in which month? And now I want to make this, instead of multiple choice, I want to make it a drop down. So I choose that. And really, it's just the format. Maybe you want to change up your format so that your students don't get bored, or it can keep them a little bit more engaged because they're having to do different things to answer it. So then I can say January, and now it has predicted again. So I can add all my months here. And what's great about a drop down is that it won't be so long when you look at it. So then when I add my answer, I choose December as my correct answer. I hit done. And now, and this is kind of a refresher from the last workshop. Anytime you want to just check out your form, you can hit this eyeball icon up here and preview it to see what it looks like. So now I can look, here's my checkbox answer, here's my multiple choice question, here's my fill in the blank, and here's my drop down. So you can see how long question 2, question 1, the boxes are bigger. If you wanted to make the boxes smaller, you can just choose a drop down. There you go. Here's my options, and I click December, and there we go. So that is also a space saver, just as an aside. So I'm going to X out of this preview, and I'm going back to my form. So I want to make that one required. I'm going to add another question. So there's, again, every single option choice. We've already gone over the short answer, multiple choice, checkboxes, drop downs. You can have them do a file upload, but I wouldn't recommend that for a quiz just because there's so many different variables there. And then the grids are just like the regular multiple choice and check boxes, except they're formatted differently. So the linear scale, you can say, I'm trying to think. Linear scale would probably not work for a quiz either. I'm trying to think of an option where you can, and I'm absolutely open to suggestions on how that would work if you can think of a way for a linear scale to work for a quiz, but I just cannot think of one off the top of my head. So, definitely the check boxes, multiple choice, short answer, and drop down are the main ones. And then as a reminder, before you send out your form, make sure that you go to your settings and you can choose whether or not to restrict to users in NMDELT. Now, if all of your students are using NMDELT emails, or if you're using your school's email domain, you can choose to do that. But if you don't want that, if you want students to access it with any email address, make sure to just uncheck that. The other thing to make sure of, because I have done this myself, in fact, I did this in this very form, I didn't ask them for their name. So you can either choose to collect email addresses. I'm going to go back to the settings. You can do that, which will force them to log on and you can see who that is, or just add a question. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to add a plus, and I'm just going to put student name. And this doesn't have to have an answer key. So just because it's a quiz does not mean you have to have an answer key on every single question. This is just asking them for their name, so it's not graded. So it's worth 0 points. It won't be part of the total point values. But always make sure that you have something that will help you to identify your students when they are filling out these forms and submitting them. So I hear a ding, so I think a question came in possibly. Oh, are you muted, Mariah?
Sorry, yeah, I was. So we actually have a quick question.
Sure.
Nadia says, I choose to collect email addresses, so when I release scores, it goes to their email. But if we don't check that, how do the students get their scores?
So here's that's actually a good question. So if you check that, okay, and obviously, Nadia, you know this, if I check that, then I can have the scores directly sent to them, okay? What if I don't check that? So I'm going to go over here. Sorry about that. I'm going to go to my quizzes settings, okay? And I want to release the grade immediately after each submission. Now, what you want to do at that point then is, or I'm sorry, that's not, I said that wrong. If you have this release grade immediately after each submission, when they hit submit, their scores will show up. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by that. So I have it as release grade immediately after each submission. And the respondent can see their missed questions, their correct answers, and their point values. And you can change this. Maybe you don't want them to see the point values. Maybe you don't want them to see the correct answers. It is totally up to you, however you want to do that. But if I have it set to release grade immediately after each submission, okay, I'm going to save that. Say I don't collect email addresses. It's not on there. Let me go to the preview and I'm going to show you what that looks like when it's submitted. So, okay, so here's my name. And I'm going to choose that for question 1. I don't even remember exactly what I had said for the answer, so I might get all of these wrong. North. And then I know this one's December, so I'm just going to do that. And this one's not graded, but I'm still going to, I had that in there anyway. Okay, so when I submit, you can view your score. Now, this could be very tricky if they just ignore this. You want to make sure that they know that they can view their score. So there you go. Now you can see I got 0 total points out of 2. It looks like I didn't give this a point value. That's what happened. I didn't give this a point value. But I can see what the correct answers are. I can see that I should have checked off more than just A. I should have checked off B, C, and D. But it allows me to see how I did. So this gives students the ability to go over it right away. So if, for example, you are setting this as, say, a practice test, and you want them to be able to see how they did immediately, you can do that. But maybe you want them to wait to see their scores until you can go over their scores with them. And I'm going to use the same example, a practice test. So I'm just going to X out of this here for a second. I'm going to go back to my settings, to my quiz settings, and I am going to change this to release grade after manual review. Now this automatically turns on email collection. So if I were to go to my general settings, you'll notice that the collect email address box is checked off, and I hit save and it will automatically collect that. So if you do not immediately release the grade, it will turn on the email address. Okay, it's required in order to do that. And then you can give the feedback manually. So those are basically your two options for feedback with the Google quiz. Were there any other questions?
There is not. Nadia did say, got it, thank you. Looking at the linear scale, it seems more like a survey type question, like on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like? And so that
Exactly.
would, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's more of a subjective type of question, more of a, you're trying to get feedback. So again, probably wouldn't use that for a quiz. That's more, for example, just for feedback for, how a student feels about something. So with that, I want to give everybody about 20 minutes or so to start creating a quiz and trying it out. As a reminder, you can always send it to me so that I can look at it if you want. If you hit the send button, which is going to be over on your top right, you can either put in the email addresses right from there, or you can click on this link option. I always shorten the URL just because it gets to be so long. I shorten it, I copy it, and then I go through my Gmail and I email the link to the form to people. You can also embed it. If you have a website that you are using for your instruction and you want to embed the form into that site, you can do it that way. That's your embed code right there. So yeah, if you want to create a quiz and send it to me so that I can try it out and make sure everything works, we can absolutely try that out. But I do want to just kind of open it up for you guys to try it out, play around, and I am going to be available for questions if you have any. And I'll just leave this up here. And I know it's going to get a little quiet. I wish I could play some music in the background. Let me see if I can do that. I'm going to try to see if I can get some music playing. And do feel free to unmute if you have a question as well. All right, I'm going to do what I have done in the past for my students. I'm going to share a Chrome tab and I am going to play some music for you all, just some classical music while you make your forms. I just wanted to pause real quick, check on you all, see if you had any questions.
Jamie, I had a question about the grid kind of questions. Like, what are those used for?
It's mostly just for the way it looks. So it's still a multiple choice question. It's still a checkbox question. Instead of being all the way up and down vertically, it's just in a grid. So it's a space saver. That's all it is.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Because I was trying to figure out, because the way it says rows and columns, I thought maybe that might be good for doing graph work, but it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, I don't know if it would really be useful for graph work. It's just more to change the look of it, the layout of it.
Wait a minute. Oh, okay. This that's weird. Okay, because I'm looking at my form, and I can't click
Oh,
on. Yeah, so I can't. I sent it to your email.
okay.
I can't click on A or B, but I can click on C or D, and I'm not sure why.
For your
Just
answer key?
well, when I preview it,
Oh, okay. Let me check my email and I'll look at that.
it's your ABQ email.
Okay,
I
no problem.
your Delta one.
No
Um,
problem. Yeah, it's funny how they have you set up the grid. I don't tend to use the grid question, like the grid format, but they have you set it up in rows and columns. So you can change, let's see, row 1,
yeah,
column 1.
it's weird that they set it up as rows and columns, but then you can't, or maybe I'm doing something wrong, but you can't click on all of them. Like it doesn't seem super practical, other than what you mentioned, which is safe spacing.
Yeah, because then you can have, for example, I'm going to share this tab. I have a different tab now. Sharing. So I'm back to my practice form. So let me go back to the question itself. This was my answer key. So I set up a multiple choice grid and I have row 1, row 2, and here's my columns, which means that I'm going to have A, B, C, D, E as my columns, and then I'm going to have 2 rows. So when I go to my answer key, you can see that each row has that option, A, B, C, D, E. And so you could very well have just one question and each row be question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4 on a quiz. And then you can choose the right answer in each one. So this, you would be able to set up the whole thing side by side in one question.
Okay.
I'm not sure I like that, but it's a different way of looking at it.
I mean, it might be good for some sort of comparison question, though I'm not entirely sure what kind of question that format would work best for.
Like if I were to go back to my example about the practice test, and so they're all multiple choice questions, there's 25. I could have 25 rows that say question 1, question 2, question 3, and I can have A, B, C, D, E as an option for each row. So then when I go to my answer key, I can say 1 is C, 2 is A, 3 is E. So you can see my screen, right? You can see how I'm setting up the answer key, and I can give a point value for every single row. And so instead of having A, B, C, D, E up and down, it would have A, B, C, D, E side by side, but it would just say, instead of question 2, maybe it would say reading practice test. And your whole test answer key would be right there. So if I were to preview this, let's go down to that last question. Here's my grid. So I can change my answers, but it is allowing me to choose All
It's not
ABC.
showing your preview. It's just showing your
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's because I'm only sharing one tab. Let me go back to sharing this tab. Okay, so now thank you for that. So now I'm switching. I switched to this tab. But see, here's my preview, and here it's showing me my grid, so I can choose. Okay, that's my answer for question 1. Question 2. It's less scrolling because they're side by side.
All
So
right. Thank you.
format-wise, that might look better, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. That makes sense. I don't know if this was going to be covered, but or if you can even answer, but I've been trying to figure out a way to have some type of graphing like question for students.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to do that virtually because they can't like put up points on a graph. But I was wondering if there was anything in Google Forms that could do that.
You know, that's a really great question. And so far, I haven't found anything that can. Where you can plot points on a graph, for example. But that's something worth researching. So I'm going to look into that. Because even if it's not in Google Forms, there might be something with a different platform that can do that.
Yeah, because a lot of the high school equivalency is knowing how to plot a graph.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I just have not been able to figure out how to do with my students.
And you know, the only thing I can think of offhand is having a Google Doc or a Google Sheet, and it would probably have to be a doc where you have, or even a Google Drawing where you can have them put their points. You might even think about trying it on Jamboard and writing out a grid on Jamboard and having them plot it out. And I actually have a Jamboard webinar coming up this month. So we can talk about how to use Jamboard for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds cool. I haven't figured out like grid, but it has been interesting to use Jamboard for like creating a graphic organizer.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the best. It's a little wonky, but you can create, for example, like if you're doing something like pointing out different parts of a paragraph, like what sentence is the conclusion, what's a detail, and you can just have them like fill it out.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I'm going to go to that email that you sent me. I'm going to take a look at that. And I'm just going to put the music back on while I do, and then I'll be right back to you, Nadia.
Okay.
Okay, so Nadia, I filled out your form, and I think you had it set for manual review, so I didn't get to see the feedback, but it did allow me to answer all of them.
Oh, whoops! I do have a habit.
That's okay.
um, because sometimes just putting in the answer key, what's it called? Like sometimes you just can't predict what students are gonna spell or how they're gonna phrase
Absolutely.
something.
Mhm.
Especially if English isn't their first language. So,
Mhm.
and you don't want. So I kind of just put manual so they don't immediately get a score or wonder why they got a lot wrong, and then I have to like immediately go in and figure it out. Sorry. Yeah. Let me.
No, that's okay because there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a good fail-safe, especially when you have, like you had a linear question, you had a short answer question.
I
You had
usually ask what's their first and last name, but I forgot this time. But that's always because their emails don't always match their names.
Right. Okay, looks like you released my score. Let's see.
Thank you.
No problem. Oh, I got 12 out of 12. Awesome.
Yeah. So I don't always add feedback until I read students' work. But I was wondering, do you have any experience with adding the feedback before, with the answer key so that it comes up? Because sometimes students would get short answers. Like I would have an feedback or answer key, but it's not the reason why they got it wrong. If that makes sense.
Mhm. No,
Um,
you know, my students really did like having that feedback right away. So, for
mm,
example, I'm going to share the tab just so that everybody can see what I'm looking at. So, I'm looking at my feedback, my quiz results, and so it shows me what I got right, and it looks like for the short answer, I got it wrong, which might be kind of common if they don't put it exactly the way that either you worded it or what you're looking for. So having feedback would let me know, well, I was on the right track,
oh,
or I was missing that clue, you know, because that was the only one that was graded. It looks like these two weren't graded, which is fine, but of the ones that were graded, that was the only one. And so that would leave me to go, okay, what did I do wrong? And maybe you want to leave that for the lesson. Maybe you have a lesson coming up the next day and you want to be able to go over that with them, or maybe you do want to give them that immediate feedback. And for the most part, in my opinion, human beings thrive on that immediate feedback. Like that was my first thing. Oh, I wonder what she wanted from me there. That was my first thought. And so that feedback would have been very helpful.
got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. It is 12:58, so I just wanted to make sure that there weren't any other questions. Fatima, I'm always happy to have you on here, kind of going along. So, did you have any questions?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
No, thank you.
All right, so the next workshop that I will do, which will be in December, will be advanced Google Forms. So we'll talk about just other ways to use Google Forms besides surveys and quizzes. So please tune in for that. We also have a tech talk tomorrow that is being presented by Mariah. She will be our presenter, and we're going to be talking about low-tech teaching tools. So please look out for an email later today about that. And there will be, from what I remember, there will be another webinar next week. So just please keep looking for my emails. I send them from my NM Delta account, and we always love having you guys on. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mariah, for moderating for me today.
You're so welcome. I was glad to be here.
Ooh, your volume was really low, Mariah.
don't know if it's really I'm fighting a cold.
Oh, okay. That
Mhm.
happens. So, Mariah, if you want to stop the recording now.